We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Calvarowski. And again, this week we're missing our fearless co-host, Susan Hobson. But as always, we have a special guest returning back to the show, Adam Bandelli. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Good morning. And we're matching pink shirts today. So we're fired up. It's Friday. We're starting off strong. And as always, we start on this show, we start with a quote. And so I want to start off with a quote here from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist thought leader, I suppose. And he says, letting go gives us freedom. Mm-hmm. And freedom is the only condition for happiness.
Wow.
If in our heart we still cling to anything, to anxiety, to anger, or possessions, we cannot be free. Adam, how does that hit you this morning?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful quote. I mean, I think about that. I think about, just having balance across your life and really putting the first things first priorities around your career, your family. For me, it's really, family first and the relationships that I have on the personal side. And then it goes back to the work we do at my firm. And so we'll talk about it in a moment, but this idea of authenticity, and can you embrace kind of the good, bad, and ugly of who you are as a leader? And does that show up in a way where you're actually investing and nurturing the talents on your team? So yeah, that definitely resonates.
Yeah, I love it. And the one thing I was thinking a lot about lately is clinging to ideas.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot in what we call the 1.0 leaders is they cling to either the way they think it should be or the way that it was or the way that they think. And once you start taking your own perspective out of the equation, you can start accessing things like empathy and where we're going to go today, which is relational intelligence. So we wanted to start off there. Now, Adam, obviously you have a new book coming out called Relational Intelligence, the 5 essential skills you need to build life-changing relationships. And it's coming out in May. But do you want to tell us a little bit about that book? Like, first off, what is relational intelligence?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we define relational intelligence at our firm, Bandelli and Associates, as the ability to successfully connect with people and build strong, long-lasting relationships. And so my journey around studying relational intelligence, it goes back, Rob, all the way to the mid-90s when Daniel Goleman came out with his book. I was in college. He came out with Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. So that was my first exposure to skills outside of your raw intelligence or your raw horsepower. And it just started me on this journey to say, okay, what do great leaders, as an organizational psychologist, the question that I've had dealt with my whole life is what makes a great leader great? And when I started studying EQ, I did my master's thesis on the idea of influence and EQ. And I found that, leaders who are like Machiavellian or narcissists, they can use their EQ for negative to manipulate and use people. And so I said, if that's part of the equation, there's got to be a different set of skills that leaders can use to inspire, develop, and really unleash the full potential of their folks. And so I did my doctoral dissertation on relational intelligence. I didn't call it that at the time. I called it some psychobabble name that we don't need to repeat here. But I studied these 5 skills. The research that I conducted at that time, this is almost 15 years ago, the results and what we found is that leaders who are high on relational intelligence, they drive more employee engagement from their folks. They have greater levels of trust, and they develop a sense of commitment and loyalty from their people. And not only that, it leads to great financial profitability for companies. So people who invest in their talent, grow their people, really help them to drive performance for the organization. So I did that in 2006, I think I completed my dissertation. Then I kind of put the idea on the shelf, but I started practicing it with my colleagues at work, with my clients, in my personal life. And so over the last 15 years, I've really refined what those 5 skills are. We'll talk about them in a moment. But it's been an amazing journey. And to now see where we are as a society and where things are with respect to coming out of the pandemic, social justice of 2020, the great resignation, I believe relational intelligence is a skill set that leaders can use to kind of navigate a lot of those things.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, obviously, we like the Daniel Goleman model for our leaders. We always start with the self-awareness and move people around that matrix. And if you haven't If you don't know what that is, Google Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence. And they basically talk about how you go from self-awareness, emotional intelligence, empathy, and relational intelligence, or relational management, I think they call it.
Yeah, relational management. Yep.
But Adam, yeah, so let's dig in a bit. You said there's 5 skills that you need to have to build these relationships. Like, do you want to break down those 5 skills for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So relational intelligence really focuses on these 5 critical skills. And I'll start with the first one, which is establishing rapport. And this is when you create that initial affinity and connection with someone. It's very, very simple things like maintaining eye contact when you communicate with someone for the first time, making a strong first impression. It's the nonverbal and body language that you use to engage with someone. It's really about finding common ground with people. And you can do that by using humor, by asking questions, by being curious. So that's the first skill of relational intelligence. The second skill is understanding others. And this has a component of EQ. So EQ, obviously, we define that as the ability to understand your emotions, the emotions of others, and how to manage emotions effectively. So if you're going to understand people that you work with, you need to have good EQ, but you also need to be an active listener. You know, it's about listening to understand and not listening just to respond. So many leaders that I work with, they just want to get their points across and they don't want to listen to their people. So to understand people, you have to truly do that, but you also have to be curious and inquisitive. You have to ask probing questions. It can't just be surface level stuff. And then, like you said, you also have to show empathy. Can you walk in a person's shoes and understand where they're coming from? So those things make up the second bucket around understanding others. The third bucket is what we call embracing individual differences. And so this is really the diversity bucket where it focuses on, can you acknowledge and accept that everyone's different from you and that you have a favorable reception towards people who think, act, and behave differently. And this can range from race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, cultural practices, faith, spirituality, and what we call now, that's been out the last couple of years, this idea of neurodiversity, which focuses on mental health and focuses on things that can impact someone and the way they show up. So we're a firm believer that if you treat people common decency, you're going to get the best out of them. It's going to lead to creativity and innovation. So that third bucket around embracing individual differences is important. The fourth bucket is the most important bucket. This is developing trust. And we define trust as making or putting yourself in a vulnerable place where you can be exposed to the actions or behaviors with others with the intention that they will kind of follow through on their commitments. To trust someone, though, and I think you'll appreciate this, Rob, there's a journey you have to go on with. We call it the mirror test, where can you first trust yourself and have the self-awareness about who you are? And then from that, you can go into how you build relationships with others. So ideas like vulnerability, psychological safety. Can you create an environment where your people feel that you're continually nurturing the relationship? In the book, I talk about the bank account of trust and this idea of intentional generosity and continually sowing and investing in the relationship. And again, it's a two-way street. I was talking to one of my colleagues last week. Relationships are reciprocal. It's not just a one-way thing. If one person is investing, the other person is not, it can damage the relationship a lot. So when you're developing trust, it's about honoring your commitments. It's about showing up consistently day in and day out for your people. And it's having a strong character and integrity. And then the last skill is cultivating influence. This is truly the most powerful skill of relational intelligence. We define influence as the ability to have a positive impact on the lives of others. So this isn't about control or manipulation or authority. It's about putting people and culture first before you drive results, before you drive performance, and it's helping your people become better versions of themselves. So the model kind of flows in a sequential kind of setup where there's understanding others, establishing rapport, embracing individual differences as the foundations of building a relationship. Developing trust is really unlocking relationships. And then empowering people is really where we have cultivating influence.
I love it. I mean, I always talk about trust being the foundation for everything. And obviously that starts with the relationship itself. And it's funny, right? Like the one key aspect of trust, and it's basically in all the models, it's not whether or not you have these core things about yourself. It's whether the other person feels like you have these core aspects of yourself. Yeah. So I always talk about it like we use I like to talk about the Charles Feltman model where it's care, reliability, sincerity, and competence. Just because 4 things it's easy to remember. Yeah. And it's not whether I have those things, it's whether Adam feels like I have those things.
It's the whole idea of perception is reality. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I love that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was about this whole aspect of diversity.
Mm,
And Amy Edmondson just put out a paper. It was like it was maybe a week ago. And
mhm.
they were talking about the impact of psychological safety
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
diversity.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of obvious,
Yeah.
but it's like what the paper basically took us through the research. What does it say about a team that's diverse? And teams that are diverse with low psych safety obviously don't perform well.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
teams that have high psych safety and are diverse perform better.
Yeah.
It's kind of obvious, but it's what do you think about that?
Yeah. So at our firm, we believe in diversity of thought. So how do you get that? You bring a different group of people around the table to share ideas. And so to do that, the leader must show up as authentic and model that for people so people can be authentic, which then creates that psychological safety. But it goes back to this idea. One of the former CEOs of MasterCard, Ajay Banga, he talked about the DQ, the decency quotient, which is not just the golden rule, but it's treating others in a way that feels encouraging, supportive, engaging. That also pushes us towards psychological safety. And I think about diversity, since 2020 and the social justice things that happen in the United States, leaders across industries try to focus on the diversity quotas, diversity inclusion programs. At our firm here, even in the way we hire and onboard our people, we want to represent diversity and not just talk about an idea. And so we hire people from all different backgrounds because we want the firm to represent the creativity and the innovation of ideas from different psychologists, different leadership advisors. So yes, without psychological safety, you cannot build that foundation where people can really be their true selves.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, the other thing I wanted to mention, you said that trust starts with yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I know that a lot of people listening are going to say, well, of course you trust yourself. But you want to go deeper into that.
Yeah, yeah. So to trust yourself, you have to really be able to understand yourself. I look at even my own personal life as I've grown as a psychologist over the last 20 years. There were a lot of things in my life around mental health and around balance and work-life balance that I didn't take as seriously as I should have early in my career, which led to some bouts of depression, which led to some other things that if I had really understood myself and worked with a coach or worked with a therapist or worked with a mentor, I could have been able to address things that would have accelerated my growth as a professional and as a leadership advisor. So it's not necessarily, I think most people say, yeah, obviously I know who I am, but have you really done the work to understand how you're wired, how your personality impacts your relationships, how your communication style may hinder or grow relationships, how your spirituality or your belief system in general, morals and values, how that ties into your work. And then also, what are your blind spots? If you don't know your triggers emotionally or relationally, it'll prevent you from really unlocking and building life-changing relationships. So you have to know yourself. You have to trust who you are. You have to be comfortable in your own skin if you're going to then be able to build trust with others.
And that's the key statement, right?
Yeah,
Is you
yeah,
have to be comfortable in your own skin and you have to
yeah,
trust yourself.
yeah, yeah,
And the deepest work and why I believe we always need to start with ourselves is
yeah,
because of those two things.
yeah, yeah,
Often what we see, and we see this across society, is the folks that are the highest achievers are the ones with the biggest deficits within themselves.
yeah,
And they fill those deficits by money, success, power, all these different things that we do. And once you start to heal that need,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's when you can start building that sense of self that I am enough. And then it changes the switch in your mind.
yeah, yeah. It becomes less about taking things in or looking at your insecurities. It becomes more about giving and helping other people. It becomes more selfless than selfish. And it doesn't have to be selfish in a negative way, but you can be just in your own world, thinking about how you're showing up and the impressions you're making on people. Once you get comfortable in your own skin, I think it can then be about what's inside of you that you can bring out and help to support and grow your people or in your intimate personal relationships. You can bring out the best in yourself when you're able to say, okay, I know who I am. I know what makes me tick. I know what's under the hood, quote unquote. Let me use the talents and the skills, the abilities I've been given, my God-given gifts to help others.
I love it. I didn't think it was going to go here, but I love this. And the other thing I wanted to just mention was there's this, I've started to get into Buddhism, obviously. And one of the concepts they talk about is life is suffering. And it's actually apparently a mistranslation.
Okay.
And the translation is more like life is thirst. And it's a thirst for more.
Yeah.
And until you're able to understand that you are enough and give up that need or that chase for something more, that's when you can, and it's kind of where we started, that's when you can find true peace and happiness inside yourself.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go there because it's a challenge that I see in almost everybody I talk to.
Yeah. Challenge in terms of what respect?
It takes a lot of work to get to that point where you're able to feel and see and trust that you're enough.
Yeah. And I think that's why, I will say to anyone, if some of your listeners are early career professionals or folks who are transitioning and moving from one industry to another, you should look for a mentor or a coach. Some of the leaders that I've coached for over a decade of my life because I've taken them and I've got onto them when they were high potentials early in their careers, senior directors, vice presidents. And now I've seen them up to being, C-suite executives. I can give you a perfect example. I worked with a woman in the financial services industry. We met back in 2008, 2009. She was just an HR business partner. But I had a session with her where we sat down and we dived into what was her vision for her future. I think vision is so important. If you have vision about where you want to go, you can start to get aligned on what your skills are now, what you have to work on. And so we had some coaching sessions. I talked about her future. I got her thinking about what does the next decade of her life look like. We wrapped up our engagement, and I keep in touch with most of my clients over LinkedIn or other social media. But she reached out last summer, a decade later now, where she was a CHRO and said, hey, I went through an experience with you, getting some feedback and doing some coaching when I was earlier in my career. I want to give that and extend that to my entire team. And so she brought my firm in to work with her whole team. So it was kind of like full circle. She was part of a team in 2010, and now 2022, she was leading a team. But that ability to really look at herself, to dive deeper and to kind of get a sense of who she was as a leader, that went with her entire career.
I love that. And Adam, what do you think are some of the most common gaps that you see with people that you work with?
Yeah, I think there's really three big things. I think the first thing is leaders who cannot get out of their egos and leaders who cannot be humble and really, it goes back to the vulnerability thing, Rob. I think if you can put other people first and nurture and invest in the relationships and develop talent, that really is the best way to get the most out of your folks. And when leaders struggle with that, that's a big piece that's there. I think the other piece is this whole work around being tactical versus being strategic. Most leaders that get promoted into roles are really strong individual contributors. I look at kind of like the sales environment in medical devices or pharmaceuticals. You get promoted because you're one of the best reps in your space. And then you get into a leadership role where you're managing other people, and it becomes a challenge because you can't make that transition from doing to delegating and being a manager of people, manager of managers. So it's, again, the first would be piece around the vulnerability, getting out of your own ego. The second would be around this strategic and tactical. And then I think the third, and this is really the biggest one, is can you put people and culture first? I think leaders who only focus on driving results can get things done and accomplished for a short period of time, but they won't do it long term. And this is where relational intelligence really comes in. This is where it's different from EQ, because people can use their EQ to trigger certain emotions in others, to elicit certain emotions, to drive the results or the outcomes that they want. When I studied Machiavellianism and EQ in my graduate work, that was a big piece there. High EQ leaders were not necessarily bad people, but they could use people as means to an end to get their goals. When it comes to relational intelligence, you can't fake it because the end outcome is how you develop and nurture and support your people. So the relationships have to be genuine. They have to be authentic. So that would be the third piece really around, are you investing in people and culture? And are you making that a priority? It doesn't need to be the whole priority. I'm not saying switch up driving results for relationships, But I'll give you a perfect example from another client in the telecommunications industry. This leader was known as a hard driving, lead with an iron fist. His perspective was that work is about getting things done, and that's it. Now, he came from a different generation. He was part of the baby boomers. Most of his team were millennials or Gen Z. So you could definitely see kind of the differences in terms of how folks are brought up. And I said to him, we don't need to move the dial from being on the performance end and profitable growth to now you're just going to be about relationships. But we got to get it at least 60, 40, 50, 50, where your people know that you're in the trenches with them, that you genuinely care about them. I think that's what a lot of leaders or a lot of employees now coming out of the pandemic, it's why we're in the great resignation. They don't feel like they're invested in. They don't feel like they have a connection. There's that saying, you don't quit jobs, you quit bosses. And we're seeing that a lot now as being one of the big issues that is causing the great resignation, that is causing people to say, hey, I know I'm talented. I know I bring something to the table. I want to feel valued and appreciated for the work that I do. And I want my leaders to invest in my growth.
And so what does that look like for you? Because I think that's a common thing that I see is leaders are like, what's the balance between accountability and building, and being this relationally intelligent leader?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually funny you say that. I was talking to one of my clients yesterday in the retail sector. She's new to the organization, taking on a new role, and she has a team of folks that she inherited. And one of the folks on the team is quote unquote a bad apple and is all about results and numbers. And she had her one-on-one with her last week. And the person is horrible. People have left the team, high attrition, folks turning over, leaving. But she's hit her numbers the last 3 quarters because she's a hard driver. And the woman that I'm coaching, I would say she's a very strong, relationally intelligent leader. Her whole framework is people and culture first. And so what she's had to do is approach it from a standpoint, let me try to build this relationship first. Let me try to get to know this leader, what makes them tick. And she's done that to a really strong extent, but the leader hasn't moved the dial on really making her folks feel like they matter. And so now it's going to more of an accountability stance where she says, hey, look, one of our cultural pillars is that we value the work that our team members do. And she's now holding her accountable and putting her on a performance plan. And again, the woman, her direct report has hit her numbers, but she's doing it in a way that is more self-serving and controlling. And she may get another quarter or two, but there's going to be dead bodies in the wake, and it's going to have a long-term negative impact. So she's trying to get out in front of it, not full performance plan, but in a sense, we're going to hold you accountable to leadership principles, not just financial KPIs. And that's the way she's working around it. So she's early on in the journey, but I think the way that she approached it and what a great relationally intelligent leader will do is they'll take the time to figure out if it's a will or a skill issue when it comes to their people. They'll address that in the moment. They'll be honest, they'll be direct, they'll be straightforward. But because they've invested in the relationship, their person, their team member will know at the end of the day that it's to make them better. She doesn't want to fire this person. She wants this person to really unlock their people's potential. And the only way to do that is to drive both those things. Continue to push for results, but make your people feel like they're part of a culture that values and make them feel like they're committed and loyal to the team.
I love it. It's in also in the radical candor matrix. They talk about personally caring, and that's the only way where your honest feedback will land in the way it's intended. Yeah. And so caring and trust, it's all like, I mean, it's kind of obvious that it all starts there. Yeah. But super.
But there's a lot of people also that I think, when I first started talking about this idea, relational intelligence, a year or so ago, and we were starting to write the book, the pushback that I was getting from my clients is, what's the so what factor, Adam? This sounds like all soft skills and things that, the mushy things that I need to do, but I don't really have to do them. And what we're seeing now with the great resignation, as I mentioned, is like employees have options now. Employees can go wherever they want. Hybrid work is going to be the norm now. And so if your people don't feel like they're important to you, I'll give you another great example. I'm working with a client in the medical devices space, and this leader is in a new role created around strategy. And she has a team of folks who are spread out across the country. Some on East Coast, some on West Coast, different time zones. And most of her new team members have been onboarded virtually. And so just having people off on their islands that are not connected, that are not working together. She has to be very intentional. And that's an important part of relational intelligence. Are you intentional about building the relationships in your personal and professional life? She's been intentional of creating opportunities for the team to come together, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, so that they can build those connections, so that they have a sense of team collaboration and team climate that can help them to get things done. And so we've launched a research program last year to kind of build our relational intelligence assessment. So I can now say to you, Rob, I'm going to give you a book with an idea, and then we can also give you an assessment to measure what your relational intelligence is. And what our research has found, and I've seen it in my clients as well, building strong relationships and connections with your people does lead to profitable growth. Your company will grow financially. The bottom line will be improved if you have relational intelligence and if you practice it. The second piece is you will keep your employees engaged. Every company does an engagement survey once a year. We're working with a client now. After they were working on relational intelligence, so we did some training with them, their engagement scores increased by 25% year over year. And so again, engagement, financial profitability. And then the last piece is really loyalty and commitment. You want people who are going to want to go through walls for you and know that you'll do the same for them. And that's an important part, I think, of one of the outcomes of having good relational intelligence.
And so how do you teach something like this? Like, I know, I mean, obviously we teach it as well, but it's like, how do you go about teaching relational intelligence?
Yeah, so it's a great thing. So we've just launched a new practice area for the firm. It's called our Relational Intelligence Experience. And so we don't believe in formal kind of training, classroom style. What we do is bring our clients together for 2-day, 3-day immersive, interactive experiences where they're just not learning about an idea, Rob, but they're practicing it right away. So this is our flagship offering, the Relational Intelligence Experience. We bring C-suite and senior executive teams together for a 2-day kind of offsite retreat where we focus on the 5 skills. But what we do is put people through interactive communication, interactive exercises to practice them. So let me give you a perfect example. The second skill set of relational intelligence is understanding others. And so understanding others, as I mentioned, you need to have good EQ. You need to be an active listener. You need to be curious and inquisitive, and you need to show empathy. So the exercise that we put people in after we share the framework with them it's called Moments That Matter. So we'll bring a team of, let's say, 6, 7 people together. And the way that it works is if you and I were on the same team, we would each have about 5 minutes to write down a success story from our life, personally and professionally, that has impacted us in a great way, in a positive way, and a relationship during that period to help us navigate that success. Then we take a couple minutes and write down what was a setback, failure, or major adversity we faced in our life, personally and professionally, and what was a relationship that helped us get through that. After everyone's done that, we go through 2 rounds of discussions where if it was you, me, and Susan in a group, Rob would go first and share his success story. And then Susan would say a empathetic or understanding comment about the story. And Adam would ask a curious or inquisitive question. And then we'd go around the circle for our strengths. Then we do a round 2 where Rob would talk about a struggle or adversity story that he's dealt with. Again, someone in the group would say an empathetic or understanding comment, and someone would ask a curious or inquisitive question. So that exercise alone, and my colleagues and I model it. So we talk about some very personal things in our lives. I talk about mental health. One of my colleagues talks about migrating over from the US, from South America, and kind of what that has meant. But we set the tone for folks and model how they should do it. And that exercise in and of itself is life-changing for the people in the room. You can have senior executives and C-suite leaders who have worked together for years, but they don't peel the onion that deep to understand kind of how childhood events shaped them, or how a mother or father who had addiction, or seeing a family member die at a young age really shapes who they are. And so that's exactly what we do. And we do that for each of the 5 skills. So when leaders come into our experience, they're immersed in kind of what these skills are and they're practicing them. And then we do follow-up coaching against that as well. So we'll have folks before they go into the experience, get some assessment. They'll do some personality assessments. They'll do an interview. They'll get some feedback. They'll have their own development plan around relational intelligence. They'll go to the immersive experience. They'll learn the skills. They'll practice the skills. Then they'll come out of it and work with a coach, taking it back to their teams. So that's at a very high level. I kind of call it our Cadillac offering. But then we do training and webinars and informationals with colleagues all the time. And then the other piece that's really, I think, beneficial, once you do this with a senior team, they want all the employees in their organization to do it. So we have a train the trainer model where we'll teach HR folks how to deliver these type of experiences for their folks, and then they can do them for the employees in the company.
I love it. That's one thing I find some trainings don't have is the actual take
Practicing
this
it.
out and do
Yeah,
it.
yeah. That's right. That's right. And what we found is if you don't do that, I mean, me talking for 20 minutes probably bores people. So like, let's get them interactive. Let's get them doing something. Let's let them practice what they're learning.
And that's, to be honest, like that's where the rubber hits the road, right? And it's like, if you can't do it, if you just hear about it or read about it in a book, there's still a gap between going out and doing it in your day to day.
Yeah, the application is key. The application is where the rubber really hits the road. Absolutely.
The other thing I love about that exercise is the vulnerability aspect. And as we always talk about, is vulnerability creates connection. And so through that exercise, like you're building trust and connection just by sharing.
When you have people crying in those exercises in a good way, you have people kind of encouraging. And again, when you're practicing these skills, it's why we do it when we talk about understanding others. You need to show empathy for your colleagues when they've gone through tough experiences. You need to ask them questions. How did you navigate your first bout with depression? How did you deal with a parent who had addiction? How did you deal with seeing a friend get murdered in high school? I mean, these are some huge life-changing events, and they do connect people when you're vulnerable and you're sharing that with others.
And you're also practice being heard and seen.
That's right. Yeah. Active listening, being heard. Yeah. All those things that you may not get to do in your day-to-day work life. And especially now that we're doing this all virtual, the lines between personal and work life has been blurred. I've seen a lot of our clients, people are getting burnt out now. They're working 14, 16 hours a day. I mean, I look at myself, I'm up at 5 a.m, writing and doing stuff. Sometimes I'm working till 8, 9 o'clock at night. And that's just the norm right now.
And that's one thing I wanted to ask you, Adam. Like, I know you mentioned you can do it intentionally remotely, and I've literally said the same thing. But what are some of the practices that you would recommend to build relationships remotely?
Yeah, I think there's really 3 things, Rob, that are important. I think we talked about already the intentionality. So it can be as simple as scheduling regular one-on-ones with your people, not just focusing on what are you accomplishing this week? What are your objectives? But really, like, how are you doing personally? How's your family doing? Like, or are you asking those things? I'm working with another leader now. She, we're moving her along the journey where she understands it's important to spend that time up front to establish rapport. She'll jump into calls and just get right to business. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's kind of have a piece. And it doesn't have to be too long, and we're not talking about shooting the breeze about the weather or stuff, but like have it be meaningful, have it be important. So that would be the first thing. I think the second thing is creating opportunities for your team to come together. I think this is the thing that is going to be missed if leaders don't do hybrid, and if they don't bring people back 1 or 2 days a week. There's just a power. And again, you and I, Rob, for example, we haven't been in the same room together. We have a good chemistry and connection from our relationship the last year, but getting you and me in a room, I think, would be a huge difference than doing it virtually. And so when a leader can bring their team together, even if it's once a quarter, I have a client in the financial services industry. This woman joined the organization last year. It's been all virtual. She got in the room twice over the last 2 months with her colleagues. It changed the dynamics of her relationships with them and kind of catapulted and accelerated the influence she could have with her colleagues. Mm-hmm. So again, that would be the second piece, bring your team together. And then I think the third and most important piece is you want to have some type of development taking place for your people. And you can do that virtually. You can be putting them through a coaching program or giving them opportunities to learn, to train, to take on new skills. So it's really those things. Take the time to connect personally, make it part of a regular cadence. Make sure you bring the team together face-to-face, in person, and really make sure that your people know that you're developing them and helping them grow.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll shout out to one of my leaders. He's Lucio. He's probably going to listen to this one. He's actually doing a pizza night. So he's an Italian guy. So he's doing a pizza cooking class with his team remotely today.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's something that they do sometimes for fun. So
yeah. I have another client in the recruiting industry. They're a small firm, probably about like 75 people, but they do these quarterly retreats. They're called summits, where they bring the whole team together, and they've gone down to Mexico for one of their summits. They've gone to Canada. They've done these things that make the whole organization come together because they're smaller boutique. But I mean, it's invigorating. It's energizing. People feel inspired. The CEO and the COO will get on the stage and talk about the vision for the year. We did a vision building exercise with them at the beginning of this year and took all their senior leaders through kind of what is your vision or word of the year for 2022, and how can you take that back to your team? So just the energy and the momentum that they build coming off these quarterly summits really inspires their people.
I love it. Adam, we have to touch on this, right? And this is something that I know both of us coach on a fair amount
Yeah.
is this relational intelligence. It's more than just work.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how do these skills, I mean, obviously, but how do they apply in our personal lives?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great thing. So the way that the book is kind of formatted or put together, I spend the first half of the book talking about the 5 skills. So there's a chapter on each of them: establishing rapport, developing trust, etc. The second half of the book is the applications of relational intelligence. So we talk about family relationships, we talk about friendships, we talk about professional relationships, and then we even talk about romantic relationships and marriage. And so I'll go there because I think that's interesting and exciting for people. You don't think of relationships at work and romantic relationships, but when you meet someone for the first time, you are in what I call the honeymoon phase. You're putting forward your best impression. This is where establishing rapport and understanding others becomes so important. How are you engaging on that first date? How are you dressed? The verbals and the nonverbals, the eye contact. You'll be surprised. It sounds so basic, but so many people are either intimidated or shy. They don't want to make eye contact. And that's the quickest way to create an intimate connection with someone is through eye contact. Understanding others, first or second date. Are you asking questions? You know, what I found, most men rather talk and brag about what they've done than actually listen to a woman and take in their perspectives. And so women who feel heard will feel more empathy. So those things are important in the early stages. Then you go, 3, 4, 5 months in and you hit the reality stage where it's like, oh shit, what did I get myself into? Relational intelligence there is really about embracing individual differences. Every man and woman that come into a relationship, or partner, man and man, woman and woman, like they bring a history and a life experience from when they were children, when they were growing up. And so can you embrace that and acknowledge that? And that's usually where relationships fail or succeed. Can you get through that reality phase? Then you move on to the adjustment phase. This is really where you say, okay, I'm taking you for all you're worth. You're good, bad, and ugly. You're taking me for all I'm worth. And we want to build something together. We want to build something together. And then lasting intimacy, this is really about creating trust. So trust in intimate relationships, there are 2 stages of trust. There's conditional trust, and you see that mostly in the business world. I trust that you're going to do your job. You trust that I'm going to do my job. We trust we're going to get it done collectively. In intimate relationships, there is this idea called unconditional trust. This is where you, not blindly, but where you respect and honor the character of the person. So you are even more vulnerable to share things about yourself, to open up, to trust that they will not hurt you. I say this to a lot of my clients, especially in romantic relationships or marriage. If the trust has gotten to the unconditional point and it is broken, that's when relationships fail. Infidelity or cheating or lying, those type of things. And then cultivating influence in a romantic or personal relationship is the most impactful skill set you can have. I think of some of my colleagues and family and friends who've been in marriages for 15, 20, 30 years. Their spouses have the most influence on them in a positive way to bring the best out of them, to see things in them that they haven't seen in themselves, and really helping them to grow and mature and build a family and leave a legacy. So that's just romantic relationships, but relational intelligence applies to your family relationships. The impact that mothers and fathers have on their children, huge. They teach them the skills growing up about how to treat people, how to embrace diversity, how to understand others. So that's a huge place, foundational place where relational intelligence is important. I'm talking with my publisher now. We're going to probably do a children's book or something around relational intelligence. Imagine when you and I were kids, Rob, if we were taught about empathy, or if we were taught about, diversity. I remember learning when I met the first, Asian kid or black kid, or, that's how I learned about diversity growing up. And I was a mixed kid. I'm half Egyptian, half Italian, half black. I mean, I didn't know any of those things. I just knew the people around me. So imagine we taught our kids in school, this is how you build a relationship. This is how you develop trust. I think we'll be able to help our children in a tremendous way.
I love it. And I wish I even just learned how to process emotions as a kid, because I had to learn that in my 30s.
I mean, I look at myself, like most young kids are taught by their fathers, you don't show emotion. You suck it up. And I remember one of my friends, he was talking about his father. His father was from the South, and he said something like, boy, we don't show emotions in the family. And that's how he was raised. And I mean, that impacted him in terms of his romantic and personal relationships, his work relationships. I think men or women, and women do it better than men when it comes to empathy, like embrace your emotions. It's okay to feel emotional. It's okay to feel anger and sadness and joy. But how do you use those emotions to get the best out of yourself? That's where the change is.
I love it. Adam, this was an incredible interview. I mean, obviously I'm going to get the book when it comes out, and I love this everything about it. Do you want to tell us, like, when it's, like, obviously it's coming out in May, but where can we find it? And obviously when you post it or when it comes live, let me know and I'll share it out.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, so we've started the marketing campaign in January. What I recommend to your audience is to go to our website, bandelliandassociates.com. If you click on our media tab, you'll see all the articles that we've written on relational intelligence over the last several months. The articles that I see your audience would probably be most interested in, we have an article on servant leaderships. And so servant leadership is really important right now. There's a mindset the servant leaders have. There's a mandate that they have and what they show up with. And then there's the methods of how they do their servant leadership. And the methods are relational intelligence. So there's an article on that. We have an article on the Great Resignation that came out last week. We're doing another article for frontline leaders we just released this week. So I would say if you want to learn about the idea of relational intelligence as we view it at the firm, if you want to know about the Bandelli relational intelligence model, those 5 skills, that's a good place to start. If you follow us on Instagram at official Bandelli Associates or follow me on Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn, you'll see all the kind of promoting that we're doing for the book. The book will come out towards the end of May. So I'll definitely let you know, Rob, so you can let your listeners pick it up. It'll be available on Apple, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. So really all retailers everywhere, you'll be able to get it. It'll be available in hardcover, soft, as well as audiobook. So we're really trying to get it out there to the masses as best we can.
I love it. And absolutely, we'll share it. I'll drop those links in the podcast notes. So if anyone's looking for it there, just click down and you'll see it. Yeah. Adam, this was an awesome interview. And I know we're going to have you back on in the future. So I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah, this is a pleasure, Rob. I really enjoyed talking with you and Susan. And again, I think for your listeners to really be able to be intentional about how they build relationships, it'll transform their lives. It's transformed my life. It's transformed the lives of my people in the firm, and it's transformed the lives of our clients. So I think relational intelligence is something that everyone can benefit from.
Totally agree. And obviously for us, for all, hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to Leadership Launchpad Project. And if you're interested, and we would love it if you shared this podcast with other leaders in your life. Obviously, there's a ton they can learn about relational intelligence and how that changes not only your life, but your business. So please share that with the favorite leaders in your life. And for anything leadership development, talent optimization, speaking, coaching, all these things, head on over to elitehighperformance.com. You can find it all there. The one thing I'd like to leave people with, and we talked a lot about it throughout this show, is it starts with ourselves and cultivating our own trust, our own psych safety, our own vulnerability, our own value within ourselves. And then once we have that on solid foundation, then we can start to build it with others. And it's always about ourselves first, because otherwise we're going to have different perceptions and needs and wants from others. And the true way to impact people in the best way for them is to feel a sense of peace and comfort in yourself. And so that's where I want to leave people with today. Adam, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Rob. Always a pleasure to talk to you and your audience.
And everyone, thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.